silence hit Darius Flint before the dust had even settled around his truck. It wasn't the peaceful kind that comes with wide, empty places, the kind that eases into your bones and makes you breathe deeper. This was the wrong kind. It pressed in, dense and watchful, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The wind moved. He could see it tugging at the dry weeds and the brittle fence posts, but it made no sound. No birds, no insects. Just stillness that felt too deliberate to be natural. He shut off the engine and let the quiet close over him. The world he'd left behind, the traffic, the sirens, the voices of neighbors through thin apartment walls, already felt like a half-remembered dream. That had been his life once back in the city. Back when he had a wife who laughed like sunlight and a child who called him Papa in the mornings. The memory struck like a bruise he couldn't stop pressing. That was before the fire, before the apartment turned to smoke and sirens and the kind of silence that had followed him here. The ranch sprawled across the flatland like an old wound that never healed. The main house leaned against its own shadow, paint flaked to gray, windows blind with dust. The barn sagged nearby, its roof collapsing in on itself, its doors hanging open like a mouth too tired to close. Beyond it stretched the skeletons of corral fences, looping around fields long since claimed by weeds. Darius stepped out, boots crunching on the hard ground, and drew in a breath that tasted of rust and sand. He'd bought the place sight unseen. That had been part of the appeal. No questions, no history anyone wanted to talk about. The real estate agent had said something about structural issues and extensive cleanup, but Darius had only cared that it was alone. No neighbors for miles, no eyes to see him, no voices to ask why he'd vanished from the world. He carried his duffel to the porch, the boards groaning beneath his weight. The house seemed to exhale dust as he stepped onto it. The stillness deepened and he realized he could hear his own heartbeat. Then something else, a faint scraping like movement across dirt. He turned sharply. Near the well, where the wind toyed with a broken pulley rope, the dust was disturbed. Footprints, small, bare. They circled the well once, twice, then trailed off into nothing, as though the owner had simply stopped existing. Darius crouched, studying them. The impressions were fresh, edges sharp, not yet softened by breeze or time. He felt a chill even as the sunlight burned down on his neck. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe some drifter, maybe kids from town years ago. But the prints didn't look old. He stood scanning the distance. Nothing but the endless stretch of land, shimmering under the heat. The barn drew his attention next. Something about it felt wrong. A shape hung from one of the doors, swaying gently. He approached, heart tightening, and found it was a doll, crudely made, straw-bound with thread, 2 black buttons for eyes. A child's toy, weathered but intact. Someone had tied it there deliberately. The wind pushed it against the wood with a hollow tap, 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 each sound sharper than it should have been in that empty place. He reached out and touched it, and for a moment the silence seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Then came the faintest whisper of movement from inside the barn. Not the creak of wood or the sigh of wind breathing. Slow, steady, unmistakably human. Darius froze. His throat went dry. The sound came again, softer this time, hidden in the shadows beyond the open doors. Every instinct screamed to turn back, get in the truck, drive until the silence was behind him. But he didn't. He stepped forward instead, past the doll into the dim, dust-laced light. The air inside was heavy and stale. Sunlight speared through cracks in the roof, falling across piles of hay, a rusted pitchfork, the remnants of a saddle hanging from a beam. He held his breath, listening. The breathing had stopped. The only sound was the faint settling of dust. Then, from somewhere deeper in the dark, the breathing began again, closer this time, slow, measured, human, and it wasn't his. The barn swallowed him whole. Sunlight lanced through the roof in thin, golden knives, cutting across the air thick with dust motes that shimmered like slow-moving ash. Every sound he made, the creak of the boards, the crunch of straw beneath his boots, felt louder than it should, as though the world were amplifying his presence to something unseen in the shadows. He took another step. The breathing stopped. Hello? His voice broke against the rafters and came back hollow, smaller than he'd meant it to be. The barn didn't answer. Darius's eyes adjusted slowly. The space was enormous, its far corners drowned in gloom. Old farm tools hung like relics of a forgotten age. A plow blade, chains, rusted hooks that caught the light like teeth. Near the back, something pale flickered. Movement so brief he almost thought he'd imagined it. He wasn't alone. The silence deepened, that same wrong kind he'd felt outside, thick and predatory. He could hear the faint creak of rope somewhere overhead. The smell of the place was old hay and animal musk, but beneath that, something faintly sweet, decaying. He moved toward the far end, careful, steady. "If someone's in here," he said, "I'm not here to hurt you." Still no reply. Then from behind a stack of hay bales, the soft rustle of movement, small, deliberate. He stopped 3 feet away. "I said I won't hurt you." A pair of eyes appeared in the dark, wide, reflecting the faint light like an animal's. Then she stepped out. At first, he thought she was a teenager, maybe 17. But as she moved closer, he saw she wasn't. Her frame was that of a grown woman, but her face carried something ageless, both childlike and ancient. Her skin was pale beneath a layer of grime, her hair a wild tangle of dark waves spilling past her shoulders. She wore what had once been a linen dress, the color of old bone, torn at the hem and stained with earth. She stared at him as if he were something she'd dreamed but never believed real. Darius swallowed, pulse hammering. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You live here?" She blinked once, twice, and then, with a trembling hand, reached out toward his face. The gesture was slow, almost reverent, like she was touching a ghost. Her fingers brushed his cheek. Warm. Real. She gasped and jerked back as though burned. Her voice came out hoarse, cracked with disuse. "You're like me." The words landed between them with a weight that didn't belong in a barn full of dust and dead wood. Darius stared at her, uncomprehending. "What?" Her eyes widened further, pupils dilating in the dim light. You speak. You move the way I do. You have eyes that see." She said it like it was proof of something sacred. Darius felt his stomach tighten. "What's your name?" "Clara." She said it with careful pride, as if repeating something she'd been taught long ago. "Papa called me Clara." The way she said Papa made his skin crawl. He tried to think of what to say, but every question sounded wrong. He'd expected an intruder, not someone who looked like she'd grown out of the dust itself. "How long have you been here, Clara?" She looked toward the roof where light cut through like thin blades and began counting on her fingers. "Many suns." The leaves were yellow when Papa grew cold. They are green again now. He felt a chill despite the dry heat. 6 months. Maybe longer. Where's Papa now? Clara pointed toward the house. He stopped breathing. I thought if I waited he would start again. But he didn't. The simplicity of it hit him harder than a scream would have. Was there anyone else? She shook her head. No others. Papa said the outside was poison. He said people like you would hurt me if they found me. People like him. Her words settled heavy between them. He tried to keep his voice steady. Why would he say that? Clara hesitated. Her gaze slid toward the cracks in the floorboards as though the shadows themselves were listening. Because I am not like you. Not really. The wind groaned through the gaps in the walls then, low and drawn out, making the hanging tools sway gently. The light shifted, and for an instant her eyes caught it, reflecting gold, too bright, too strange. Darius stepped back before he realized it. She tilted her head, studying him the way a stray animal studies a hand that might strike or feed. I'm sorry, he murmured, though he didn't know why. You must have been terrified here alone. Clara's face softened. Not alone. Papa stayed until the night came. Then he told me you would come someday, someone like you. Her tone carried such absolute certainty that his breath caught. He looked past her to the barn's rear wall. There, half hidden under straw and old wood, was something carved into the boards. A series of symbols, spirals and marks that looked both mathematical and organic, burned into the wood as if by heat. He reached out to touch them. Clara grabbed his wrist fast, her grip surprisingly strong. No, she whispered. Papa said those are for keeping things out. What things? She didn't answer. She just looked at him with those wide, unblinking eyes. They're listening. The silence outside thickened again, stretching like a held breath. Somewhere beyond the barn, a single crow cawed, the first sound of life he'd heard since arriving, and then went silent mid-cry, cut off as though swallowed. Darius turned back toward her, but Clara was already retreating into the shadows, moving with a fluid grace that didn't belong to someone who had lived on human rhythms. He wanted to call after her, to demand answers, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he found himself staring at the symbols on the wall, at the faint scorch marks, and at the way the air around them seemed wrong, as though the light bent ever so slightly when it passed. The silence outside deepened again, and this time Darius understood. It wasn't absence. It was anticipation, and whatever this land was waiting for, it had just woken up. Darius stood in the doorway of the barn until the light began to fade, unsure whether he'd imagined everything that had just happened. When he finally turned toward the house, the horizon was bleeding out its last streaks of red, and the air had taken on that fragile stillness that comes before night decides what it will keep. The farmhouse leaned against the wind like a drunk who had long ago stopped caring. Each step on the porch sent up small sighs of dust. The key from the deed still hung around Darius's neck, a habit he hadn't shaken since the city. He turned it in the lock and the door gave way with a soft, defeated groan. Inside smelled of paper rot, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Furniture lay under shrouds of linen, each piece ghost pale in the dim light. He pulled one of the sheets away. A chair collapsed in on itself, eaten hollow by time. The wallpaper had peeled into curling strips, exposing wood that looked almost bruised. He moved room to room, his flashlight cutting narrow corridors through the dark. Every beam found some echo of a life half-lived. A broken teacup, a boot print hardened into the floor, a set of photographs whose faces had faded into ghostly ovals. On the mantel was a clock that had stopped at 3:07. The second hand quivered slightly, though there was no power for miles. Then he saw the door at the end of the hall. It was newer than the rest, heavy, reinforced, a modern lock bolted into century-old wood. Beside it hung a rusted nameplate stamped study, the key from his neck fit. The smell hit him first, disinfectant and old blood. The walls were lined not with books but with shelves of glass jars, each containing yellowed fluid and unidentifiable things suspended inside. Coils of tissue, fragments of bone, something that looked disturbingly like a small hand. On the desk sat a journal. The leather was cracked, the first page written in a precise looping script. June 12th, and Subject 7 responds favorably to sunlight exposure. Speech acquisition slower than predicted. Behavioral patterns mimic empathy but lack comprehension. The failure of 1 to 6 suggests increased compatibility through direct lineage. Darius read the line twice. Direct lineage. His pulse stumbled. He turned more pages, faster now. The entries stretched back decades, notes, sketches, fragments of equations. The handwriting grew more frantic, the words darker. If I cannot preserve the flesh, I will re-engineer it. My son refused to understand.
He chose art over survival.
Perhaps he will understand when he returns to her. He dropped the book. The echo filled the room like a gunshot. His hands were shaking. Something else caught his eye. A framed photograph half buried under papers. A man with his own eyes. A younger version of the father he'd cut out of his life years ago. Next to him stood a woman with dark hair, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. His mother, and scrawled beneath in fading ink, for the continuation of the line. The house gave a slow, drawn breath, its timbers settling, or listening. He heard footsteps then, bare, light, just outside the door. He froze. Clara? No answer. The footsteps stopped right behind him. He turned too quickly, flashlight cutting through empty air. The hallway beyond was dark. Only the faint sound of breathing, steady, familiar, moved through it. Clara. He tried again, softer. It's all right. A whisper drifted from the darkness. Papa used to sit in there. He said the walls remember. The light found her half hidden behind the doorframe, eyes reflecting white. What does that mean? He asked. She stepped forward, gaze fixed on the journal lying open on the floor. He said the house keeps the echoes. If you listen too long, they come back. Come back how? Her head tilted. The same way he will. Something thudded under the floorboards, one then another, like the slow rhythmic knock of something alive beneath the house. Dust fell from the ceiling in tiny silver clouds. Darius stumbled back, the beam of his light shaking across the walls. The jars rattled softly on their shelves. Clara didn't move. She was smiling now, faint and sad. He's waking up, she whispered. The sound came again, louder this time. A dragging noise, deliberate, traveling beneath their feet. Darius grabbed her wrist. We're leaving. But Clara only looked down at where his hand touched her. He told me you would come to finish what he started, she said, voice almost tender. You were his first. The boards at their feet split with a long, cracking sigh. Cold air surged up through the gap, smelling of iron and earth. Darius fell back as something beneath the floor shifted. A shape, indistinct but huge, moving in the dark space below. Clara crouched at the opening, her hair falling forward, her face lit from below by the flashlight's trembling beam. "Papa," she murmured. A wet, rasping breath rose from the pit in answer. The wind outside howled through the broken windows, slamming the door wide. For the first time since he'd arrived, Darius heard sound, too much of it. The house groaning, the barn door banging, the whisper of countless small feet running somewhere just beyond sight. He stumbled backward into the hall, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. Behind him, Clara was still staring into the darkness under the floor, whispering to whatever answered her. The house seemed to pulse around him, alive, remembering, and for the first time, Darius Flint began to understand that the silence he'd found here wasn't emptiness at all. It had been waiting. The noise beneath the floorboards faded, leaving the house breathing in long, uneven sighs. Darius stayed crouched in the doorway of the study until the last trace of movement stopped. The flashlight beam trembled across the broken boards, catching only dust. No sign of Clara, no sign of the thing she'd called Papa. He forced himself to stand. The silence returned, not the empty kind from before, but one that carried memory. Every wall seemed to hum with it. When he tried to step away, the wood underfoot moaned as if reluctant to let him go. Outside, the sky was bleeding violet. The horizon had swallowed the last of the sun, and the field stretched endless and colorless under the rising dark. The barn door shifted in the wind, banging once, twice like a warning. He needed light. Power. Something normal. The generator sat half buried behind the shed, caked in rust. He pulled the starter cord again and again until his arm burned. On the fifth pull it coughed, shuddered, then roared to life. The noise felt obscene after so much stillness. Yellow light flickered on in the windows of the house, weak, sputtering but human. That was when he saw the bus lights cresting the hill. A pair of beams cut through the dusk, bobbing along the distant road. He hadn't expected anyone. He hadn't seen another living soul since arriving. But the sight of them was enough to make him stumble forward, waving. The bus slowed, gravel crunching beneath its tires, and came to a stop at the gate. The door hissed open and an old man climbed down. Gray hair, grease-stained uniform jacket, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Evenin'," he called. "Didn't think anyone had bought this place again." "Darius Flint," he said, shaking the man's hand, grateful for the weight of another human. "Eldon Price," the man replied. "Used to drive the mail out here, before the ranch went bad." "Bad?" Eldon's eyes narrowed. "You didn't hear the stories?" "Guess the realtor kept that part quiet. Man who lived here before, scientist, some kind of doctor. Folks said he went strange, stopped coming to town, claimed he was building angels out of dust and bones." He gave a small laugh that didn't sound like a joke. "Last delivery I made, he paid me with a jar of teeth. Didn't come back after that." Darius felt the air drain out of his chest. He didn't answer. Eldon squinted toward the house. "You seeing lights in the windows already? That place don't hold power. Been off-grid for years." "I got the generator working," Darius said too quickly. The old man nodded, but his gaze lingered. "You out here alone?" Darius hesitated. The lie came easy. "Yeah." "Well," Eldon said, pulling his coat tighter. "If you need anything, tools, diesel, advice on how to keep from going mad, town's 45 miles east. Don't stay out past midnight. Winds carry strange out here." Before Darius could ask what he meant, the driver climbed back onto the bus. The door shut, the engine rumbled, and the vehicle vanished into the horizon's dusk. The sound faded fast, swallowed by the planes. He turned toward the house. In the upper window of the study, something moved. A flicker of white cloth, hair catching the light, a face too still. Clara, watching him. When he reached the porch, the door was open again, though he'd locked it. The generator's hum faltered, then steadied. "Clara?" he called. She stood in the hallway barefoot, her eyes reflecting the bulb's dim light. "That man," she said quietly. "He smelled wrong. What are you talking about?" Her gaze drifted toward the window. "Papa said there are two kinds of people, the ones who make and the ones who feed. He said when the feeders come I should hide." "Clara, the man was just a bus driver." Her head tilted the way it always did when she was thinking too hard. "Then why did he stop breathing when he looked at me?" Darius froze. "What?" She blinked, confused by his reaction. His chest went still, only for a moment. Then it started again. He rubbed a hand across his face. You imagined it? Clara's expression didn't change. I don't imagine. Papa said my eyes see what others cannot. A faint click echoed through the house. The lights flickered once, twice, and steadied again. She looked up toward the ceiling, then at him. He's closer now. Darius wanted to demand who she meant, but before he could, the generator choked. The lights snapped off. Darkness flooded the hall. Somewhere behind the walls, a slow, dragging sound began again. The same weight that had moved under the floor earlier, now climbing, through the walls, through the pipes, through the bones of the house. Clara stepped back, whispering words he couldn't understand. The air turned sharp, electric, the temperature dropping until his breath misted. Then the sound stopped. A single knock, deep, deliberate, sounded from the front door. Darius turned the flashlight on, its beam shaking. The knock came again. 3 times, slow, patient. He forced himself forward and opened it. The night outside was empty. No footprints on the dusted porch, no figures on the road. But on the threshold lay something small, the straw doll from the barn. Its button eyes stared up at him, and around its neck hung a tag written in a hand he knew too well. Welcome home, son. The wind rose then, carrying the faint echo of the bus engine fading into the dark, but over it, clear, impossible, coming from deep inside the house, he heard the soft, uneven breathing of his father. The house kept whispering long after the wind had died. Every board, every beam seemed to carry a voice that wasn't quite sound, just a low vibration in the bones, the kind that made thought itself uneasy. Darius left the doll on the porch, though he could feel its button eyes watching his back even as he shut the door. Inside, Clara was standing in the middle of the hallway, hands clasped as though in prayer. Her skin looked translucent in the generator's dying light. He's inside now, she murmured. Stop saying that, Darius said more harshly than he meant. Her eyes lifted to him, calm and certain. You brought him with you when you opened the door. He wanted to argue, but something in her tone stopped him. The house did feel different, as if a second pulse had joined his own. The generator stuttered again, then caught. He found a lantern on the kitchen counter and lit it, more for company than illumination. The small flame painted the walls gold, casting shifting shadows that moved when he didn't. I need to see what's under the floor, he said. Clara tilted her head. That's where he sleeps, Darius swallowed. Then I'll wake him properly. She didn't try to stop him, only followed in silence as he crossed to the study. The boards he'd seen split earlier were now gaping slightly wider, as if something beneath had breathed out. He set the lantern on the desk, pried up the nearest plank, and shone the light down. A narrow staircase wound into the dark. The air rising from it smelled of stone, dust, and old water. Clara didn't follow this time. If you go down there, she said, he'll remember you. Good, Darius said, though his voice trembled. I've been trying to forget him my whole life. The steps groaned under his weight. Each footfall sounded too loud, swallowed instantly by the dark. At the bottom lay a corridor carved directly into the earth, walls slick and glistening. The lantern light barely reached the end. He walked, counting his steps. 20. 30. The air grew colder, pressing close against his skin. A faint hum seemed to come from the stone itself, a heartbeat steady and slow. At the corridor's end stood a door of iron and wood, reinforced with heavy bolts. A sigil was carved into it, the same spiral symbols he'd seen burned into the barn wall. He touched the metal. It was warm. The hum behind it grew louder, almost rhythmic, like breathing through water. He thought he heard a voice beneath it. His own name spoken softly, as though someone were remembering how it sounded. Papa? The word escaped him before he realized it. The voice stopped. Then, from the other side, a whisper. Darius. He stepped back, pulse hammering. The voice wasn't like he remembered, older, cracked yet tender, almost loving. You came home, it said. Where are you? A pause. Where you left me. He reached for the latch before he could think better of it, but when his fingers brushed the metal, the warmth turned to ice. He yanked his hand away. Frost bloomed instantly along the wood grain, crawling outward in delicate veins. The hum ceased. The silence returned, so sudden, so complete it felt alive. When he turned, Clara was standing halfway down the stairs. the lantern glow painting her face in trembling light. "He remembers," she said. He climbed back up, every muscle shaking. "What is that room?" "That's where Papa kept his others," she whispered. "The ones who didn't wake right." He stared at her. "Others?" She nodded once. "He said you were the first to survive. That's why you left. But he always said you'd come back when you forgot how to be one of them." A chill traced down Darius's spine. "One of what, Clara?" She didn't answer. Her gaze went past him to the iron door below. "He's moving again." The air trembled faintly at first, then stronger. A pulse in the walls, as if the house itself had a heartbeat. Dust sifted down from the ceiling and the lantern flame stretched tall and thin. "Come upstairs," Darius said. "Now!" They reached the main floor just as the generator sputtered out for the last time. The light died, leaving only the lantern's flicker. The front windows showed nothing but the black of the plains. He wanted to believe this was madness, the isolation, the grief, the stories. But in the reflection of the glass just behind Clara's shoulder, he saw a third figure standing in the hallway. A tall man, features indistinct, head bowed slightly as if in prayer. Darius turned. The hall was empty. When he looked back at the window, the reflection was gone, but the faint impression of a handprint, large, heavy, was left on the glass from the inside. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the lantern, listening to the wind slide against the walls, waiting for the next sound from below. It didn't come, but near dawn, when the first light touched the fields, he found Clara standing barefoot on the porch, staring toward the well. "Did you dream?" she asked without turning. "No, I did." Papa was standing at the bottom of the water. He said the house isn't the cage. What is? She looked at him then, eyes darker than the sky behind her. "You." The morning came colorless. A thin white mist rolled in from the fields, swallowing the fence line and the horizon until the world shrank to the size of the house. Darius sat by the kitchen table, staring at a mug gone cold, listening to the creaks and sighs of old wood adjusting to the day. Every sound felt amplified, intimate, as if the house were trying to breathe in rhythm with him. Clara hadn't spoken since the dream. She'd gone quiet in that strange, faraway way of hers, eyes always turned toward the well. When he tried to ask what she'd seen, she only said, "He's waiting to be remembered." That morning she was gone. Her bed, a nest of blankets near the hearth, was still warm. But her footprints led out the back door, small and precise, vanishing into the mist. "Clara," he called, his voice barely carried. The air swallowed it whole. He followed the prints across the overgrown yard, past the rusted troughs and half-collapsed fence until he reached the well. The rope hung limp, swaying slightly even though there was no wind. Something moved below. Not the ripple of water, but a flicker of light, pale, rhythmic, like the pulse of a heart deep underground. "Clara," a faint voice drifted up, blurred by echo and distance. "He says you should remember now." Darius froze. "Clara, get away from there. He says you left because you were afraid of what you made." He stepped closer, peering into the black mouth of the well. The light flickered again, stronger this time, illuminating the smooth stone walls. He could almost see movement, a shadow reaching upward, then silence. He ran to the barn for the rope ladder he'd seen hanging from a beam. The moment his hand touched it, he stopped. There was a smear of dirt on the ladder's lowest rung, and a handprint, small, delicate, and unmistakably Clara's, pressed into the dust. He dropped the ladder, backed away, and something shifted in the hayloft above him. "Clara." But it wasn't her voice that answered, it was his own. "You shouldn't have come back." He looked up. Between the slats of the loft, half hidden in shadow, stood a figure. Same build, same stance, the same tilt of head. His own eyes looked down at him from the dark. He stumbled backward, breath catching. The figure moved with him step for step, as though mocking a reflection. Then just as suddenly, it was gone. The silence afterward was worse than the sight itself. He ran back to the house, slamming the barn door shut behind him. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the ceilings lower. He found the old mirror in the hallway cracked down the middle, and yet, in its fractured surface, he could see movement behind him even when he stood still. The mind fills voids, he told himself. Isolation does things, but then he saw it again. The doll from the porch now placed neatly on the kitchen table. Only this time its straw face had changed. Someone had added a second button eye, the other half of a face. His half. He dropped into a chair, trembling. His memories came in fragments. A storm, screams, glass breaking, the smell of smoke. He'd built something, no, someone, in a laboratory that didn't belong to him. His wife had said, "You're not saving her. You're replacing her." And then everything went dark. He gripped the table until his knuckles went white. The door opened behind him. Clara stepped in, her hair wet, her dress clinging to her frame. "He said you wouldn't remember until I called you back." "What did you do?" She smiled faintly, not cruelly but with something close to sorrow. "He was never gone, Darius. He's in the bones, in me, in you." He shook his head. "That's not possible. He made us to be what he couldn't. Something that doesn't die." The words landed like stones in his chest. "You mean Papa?" She nodded. "He built us both. But you were the first that lived. You left because you thought you were real." The floor creaked beneath their feet. The hum began again, soft, low, coming from the earth below the house. The same heartbeat he'd heard in the underground corridor. Clara stepped closer, eyes reflecting the lantern light. "He's waking now. He wants his children home." He backed away until his shoulders hit the wall. "Clara, you don't understand. Whatever he made us for, it's wrong." She reached out, fingertips brushing his sleeve. "Then why does the house know your name?" Before he could answer, the humming deepened. The mirror in the hallway began to tremble, the crack widening until it split clean through. From its shattered surface came a faint voice, the same one that had whispered to him through the door below, his father's voice. "Darius," it said, "you came back to finish my work." The light in the room dimmed to gray. Clara stood motionless, eyes fixed on the mirror. The last thing he saw before the lantern went out was her reflection, standing beside his, but where his face ended, hers began like two halves of one person. Then, from beneath the floor, came the sound of a latch unlocking, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was waiting. The first light of dawn could not touch the ranch. A gray pall hung over the land, thick enough to make distance meaningless. Darius woke on the kitchen floor with dirt beneath his nails and the taste of iron in his mouth. The lamp had burned out. Only a faint bluish glow leaked through the cracks of the boarded windows. Trembling like breath on glass, he tried to move, but the house was heavy now. Every beam groaned under a weight that felt older than the land itself. Beneath him, deep under the floor, the heartbeat had grown stronger. He's waking now. Clara's words rolled through his mind, blurring with his own father's voice until he couldn't tell them apart. He rose unsteadily, following the thrum down the hallway to the cellar door. The latch hung open. The air that drifted up was no longer cold. It carried the smell of earth after rain, fresh, almost sweet, as if the soil itself had been turned and something living had begun to breathe again. Clara, no answer. Only the whisper of cloth somewhere below. He took the lantern and descended. Each step creaked with damp as though the boards were absorbing his weight, pulling him down faster than gravity allowed. At the bottom, the corridor no longer looked the same. The walls, once stone, now pulsed faintly with color. Gray shot through with veins of pale light. It looked alive. He reached the door with the carved sigil. Frost no longer rimed its edges. The wood was warm, as if someone had been leaning against it from the other side. He put his ear to it. A sound like slow breathing filled the silence, and beneath it, words formed, soft and familiar. "You always meant to come home." Son, he gripped the handle. "What did you do to her?" A pause. "What I did to you." The door unlatched by itself. Inside was a circular chamber carved directly into the earth. Dozens of jars lined the walls, glass sealed with wax, each filled with something that shimmered like light trapped in liquid. Some pulsed faintly, in rhythm with the heartbeat that filled the air. Others lay still, cloudy, long expired. In the center stood a metal table, half rusted, half polished by use. Chains hung from the ceiling like vines. On the table lay a shape covered in cloth. "Papa?" From the far side of the room, a figure stepped forward. His father looked no older than the day Darius had last seen him, his hair silvered, eyes bright with feverish purpose. But his chest did not rise or fall. His movements were wrong, a little too fluid, a little too rehearsed. "You never finished the work," the man said. "You ran from it, from me, from what we are." Darius backed away. "You're dead. Death is a habit, Darius. One eye broke when I made you. The words hit harder than the cold ever could. Images flashed behind his eyes. Hospital lights, the smell of antiseptic. His wife's face twisted in horror as she whispered, "That's not him." He stumbled toward the table, tore away the sheet. It was Clara, or what had been Clara, skin pale as wax, veins of light flickering beneath the surface. Her eyes were closed, serene. She looked less like a body than a vessel waiting to be filled. "I made her for you," his father said, "to keep you company when you forgot." But she woke too early. She thought she was real. Darius turned on him. "What am I then?" The old man smiled sadly, almost lovingly. "You're my first success. My son twice over. Flesh rebuilt, memory rewritten. You were never meant to remember the accident, the fire, or how much of you I had to replace. But memory always leaks through the seams." Darius's throat tightened. "So none of this, none of me is real?" "Real enough to hurt," his father said. "Real enough to come back." He reached out, but Darius stepped away. The air vibrated. The heartbeat thundered through the walls, shaking dust from the ceiling. The jars began to glow one by one until the chamber was filled with their light. Clara's eyes opened. She looked at Darius, truly looked, and for a moment the human softness returned. "He wants us to be one," she whispered. "To make him whole." "No," Darius said. "We end this." He grabbed the lantern and hurled it against the nearest wall. Flame bloomed, hungry and orange. The jars shattered in a chorus of breaking glass. Light spilled like blood. His father's voice rose in fury, then in plea. "You'll burn yourself, boy." "I was already dead," Darius said. He turned to Clara. "Come with me." She smiled through the smoke. "You already have." When he reached for her, his hand passed through her skin like mist. The heartbeat slowed. The walls trembled once, twice, and then began to crumble. As the chamber collapsed, the last thing he saw was his father's face dissolving into the light, sad, triumphant, gone. He woke in the field hours later, lying beside the ruins of the house. The mist had lifted. Morning sun touched the hills. The well was gone, filled in by the collapse. Only the doll remained beside him, half-burned, its two mismatched eyes staring skyward. He felt no pain, only an immense, hollow quiet. When he raised his hands, the skin along his wrists shone faintly, almost metallic. The pulse beneath was not blood, but light. Somewhere deep in the earth, a single heartbeat answered his own. And for the first time, Darius understood. The ranch was never a refuge. It was a womb, and he had just been born again into his father's unfinished dream.